I'm Victoria Lucke. I'm going to be asking difficult questions tonight of two sociology professors who've graciously agreed to speak about the issues raised in the movie. Just a little bit about me. In an earlier life, I was a journalist. I worked for a brief period in Asia, and then later I became a lawyer in America. Our speakers are both professors at UNSW's Social Policy Research Center. Heng Ha Chang is a visiting fellow from Taiwan's leading university. The charity that runs the Malawi orphanage you saw featured tonight, as well as several other orphanages across Southern Africa, has very close ties with Taiwan. Heng-hao spent several years in America where he got his PhD. His research is focused on disabilities. Turning to Ilan Katz, he has degrees from South Africa and London. He researches a wide range of social policy issues with a particular focus on cultural identity and child abuse. He has conducted a number of projects in China, as well as other parts of Asia. Before turning this speech over to Heng-hao and Ilan, or I should say turning to Heng-hao and Ilan for their views, I want to note that to keep things simple, we'll be talking about China and the Chinese, although we are well aware that the organization running the Malawi orphanage, as well as the other orphanages in Southern Africa, has very close ties to Taiwan. It is Chinese culture and Chinese civilization in general that ACC, the organization that runs the orphanages, is promoting. So I'll start with our first question. Some of you may have seen the introduction from Nicole Schaefer, the director, and she talks about how Malawi and other parts of Africa are forming very close ties with China. And she said that portraying the orphanage was a metaphor for the ties between Africa and China and for China's growing influence. So we're going to talk now about China's growing influence, and Nicole raises the issue, and I'd like to raise it with the two of you. How different is China's growing influence from the influence we've seen exercised by colonial powers, typically Christian values, European, some of them established mission stations? I'll turn first to you, Ilan.
Yes, well, it was remarkably similar, and when I looked at the movie, it seems that the Chinese have taken the copybook really from the British, because a lot of the colonial enterprises, particularly by the British, was first started by missionaries and boarding schools, etc. And that's the sort of soft power bit of it, and then followed by harder power type, invasions, etc. So the Chinese seem to be operating in that sense in quite a similar way, sort of introducing new cultures and new opportunities as a sort of positive development, but behind the scenes, obviously they also tend to have other agendas as well. And some of those agendas did come out in the film as well.
I suppose one difference might be that it was typically at the initiative of governments that different cultures took hold in Africa. And here we have a private organization that is fostering the adoption of Chinese culture. Now, let me turn to you, Heng-hao. ACC made it clear that it views Chinese civilization as superior. And I wondered what your thoughts were on that. Do, shall I say, quotes unquote, colonial powers always view their civilizations as superior, or are the Chinese different in this respect?
Well, it's a hard question, but I think in a way it's really parallel to Western colonialism in the past. But there are some differences, as we mentioned. Part of it is like Buddhism is not really a single God religion. So in a way, it's more flexible in religious practice, and it because in the movie we can show is there are more space to allow different religions to come in and out. And another thing is like, I think the world is different now, as we see. I think the belief in Chinese superiority is there. Like you can see those Chinese entrepreneurs anywhere in Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, buy this, like, right, see those fundraising activities and willing to donate to help, quote unquote, the orphanage. But it's different, as you mentioned. I think the relation between capital flow and the nation state is very different now. You have a large group of Chinese entrepreneurs anywhere in the world. It's not by a single country. And a lot of time when we talk about Chinese influence in Africa, it's actually PRC. So there's some difference there in terms of how nation state engage in this process. That's
yeah.
right.
Yes, thank you for that. Ilan and Heng-hao, whoever wants to take this question, the founding person for ACC, shall I say, Master Hui Li, he believes that the values he sees as central to Chinese culture and Buddhism will help the students become agents of change in fighting poverty and disease. Do we get a sense of what those values are? Would you like to take that, Ilan?
Well, it was pretty clear that the key value was discipline and religion and sort of self-control. And I think Enoch at one point did talk about self-control as being the key value of Kung Fu. And that was, I guess, the main value that was inculcated. Another value, I think, which actually is quite similar in African cultures and Chinese cultures is the idea of collective responsibility, responsibility to not only yourself, but to your family and your nation. And that came out quite strongly. And I see in contrast with a value that most Western students have, which is that education is for personal development. In this case, education was not just about Enoch or about them. It was about, improving their villages, their families, and the nation. So I would say that those are the main values that came out for me. I don't know about Heng-hao. What do you think?
I just want to make a quick footnote on that, which is that, and then we'll turn to Heng-hao, which is that it was the collective, the societal responsibility that was emphasized by the leaders at the orphanage. I totally agree with you. But then it was responsibility to the family, to the smaller nuclear unit that was emphasized by his auntie. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed to me that was slightly different. I don't know, did you have any thoughts on this collective responsibility, the responsibility to society, Heng-hao?
Well, certainly it's mentioned in the documentaries, and but I think every society has some kind of collectivism, like responsibility to the family or to the society, and the orphanage try to impose this to those kids in the center, and I'm not quite sure it will work, because although the way Enoch make choices is based on family's response, but by the end he chooses to study Kung Fu, so I'm not even sure those discipline or those teaching works, and how that works to help the nation to develop. It's actually more westernized individualist approach, is it? So
I suppose he could become a cultural ambassador for China now if he's focused on martial arts.
Well, but it's very different from what the center tried to teach him, right? be responsible, help the development of the country, or help your, well, maybe help your family, but it's more like individual interest. Like I want to do this, and there's martial art, kung fu image. It's very appealing in TV and movies. It's very Hollywoodized, right, in a way. So for me, it's very interesting. Like the way ACC want to teach one thing, and there's a very strong culture, local family roots, but his final decision is kind of very interesting note by the end.
It is interesting. You had mentioned to me when we were chatting earlier that you thought there was more discipline in this orphanage than you would imagine exists in most Buddhist centers in Taiwan. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's mixed with some kind of racism or some kind of racial discriminations. They feel like African people need a more strong discipline. So we have very strict rules and use the stick. I think some of the issue might not be seen in the movies, like how they discipline those children at center. We saw the brutal fights a little bit, but I think it's just part of it. So yeah.
We could explore the subject for a long time, but let's just switch focus. Do you think ACC struck the right balance between affording the students a secular education and inculcating Buddhist practices and values? Would you like to take that, Ilan?
Well, they weren't that successful, were they, in inculcating Buddhist values, I didn't think. And some of the discussions you saw between the students showed that I think they were certainly not converted to Buddhism. It's hard to say from this video, you know, how much emphasis they put on this or that. And they certainly, you know, there was a secular element to it and a Buddhist kind of component, but the ethos was obviously very Buddhist focused. But it seemed to me from a lot of the discussion, you know, the sort of peripheral discussion, that the primary purpose was not really to disseminate or Buddhism as such, but more about Chinese culture more generally. I think, and I don't know actually what the link between Kung Fu and Buddhism is. I've never really associated the one with the other, so yeah, it's not clear that when he's in Taiwan, you know, how Buddhist focused his education actually would be.
Well, we saw him observing many Buddhist rituals in the temple, for example. So now, do we think that he internalized Buddhism? Do we think he became a Buddhist? What do you think, Heng-hao?
Well, I think in the first place, it's just very specific type of Buddhism. So I'm not a religious specialist, but I guess most Buddhist scholars might say this is not Buddhism at all. So you don't do Kung Fu and like hard discipline in the Buddhist temple. A lot of Buddhism look at like spiritual self-training, not really help your family or help the country to have economic development. So I would say it says more about the belief in Chinese culture, or even something related to so-called Confucius belief on educations. And you can tell that those children in the orphanage don't really see that works. Yeah. Oh, in a way, if we turn the picture around, Buddhism doesn't practice in this way, like you need to have conversion or something. It's very Western idea of you need to conversion. Buddhism is more flexible in a way. So in the Buddhist agenda, I don't think it's even that important in terms of what they want to impose or you want to train in the center. It might make more sense when they do fundraisings. Religious belief always looks good when they do fundraising, but
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the spread of Buddhism in the center, probably not much. Yeah.
Well, we touched on whether Enoch internalized the value of religion for itself, not religion, education, apologize, for itself. We also touched on martial arts because he talks about the values that he thinks martial arts should impart, and it's not clear that he has absorbed those values. So it's not clear what ACC is achieving with these children beyond offering them a secular education, but isn't that an admirable goal in itself? Ilan?
Yes, well, I mean, this gets to the whole issue of orphanages and their value. And as you know, it's become very, very controversial around the world, the whole idea about orphanages. I mean, this one, to its credit, seemed to be well run. But there's a big movement around the world to close down orphanages, partly for the reasons that you see here, in that they take children away from their natural environments and put them in strange environments away from their family and their cultural connections. But many orphanages around the world use those children really to raise money through through international adoption, for example, and sometimes even trafficking. So there's a big movement by UNICEF and other organizations to close down orphanages and to do away with what's called voluntourism, which is people from the West going and working in those orphanages and giving them money. In this case, it's people from China going to them and giving them money, maybe. On the other hand, for those individuals who do benefit from the education, yes, there were obvious advantages, and to me that was the core sort of struggle for Enoch, was the advantage of education on the one hand versus the cultural disconnection that he then had to suffer in order to get that education, and how he managed that struggle, I think, is the kind of core of that, or the emotional core anyway, of that whole film. And I think for every child that goes into an orphanage like that, they're going to have that difficulty. And so, just going back to my previous point, that the idea now is, rather than take children out of their environment and put them into orphanages, the idea is to support the actual environment. So to build a school in that village and help those kids in that village, have a better education, etc.
Well, that's interesting.
And that would be the more modern thinking about how one should go about doing these things. So
that's a very important point. I think ACC may be doing some of that, but I suspect they won't be as successful in exposing the children to Buddhism that way. So whether their sponsors will continue to support that or not is an interesting question. We'll have to wrap up shortly. I'm just wondering if Heng-hao would like to talk about what feelings he was left with about Enoch in an orphanage as opposed to the life he would have had if he hadn't been given that opportunity.
Well, it's a hard one. Actually, when I finished the movie, I cannot keep thinking about, is there alternatives to do, alternative way to support orphans in Malawi or other South Africa countries. So it's very easy to have a very critical point that I agree with Ilan, that it's simply wrong to take them away from their natural environment and actually away from their own language and impose some kind of philosophy or practice, which might actually there in their natural environment, we don't know, because they were taken away from their natural support, their family and village. But you cannot deny that they do have more opportunities, like traveling around the world, see different opportunities, and in a way, still have the choice to do something different. So
I think that's very well put. And I think we can all agree this was a thought-provoking film, raising some very interesting issues that unfortunately we can't explore in depth now. But I really appreciate your coming to chat about it. It's very valuable to have your insights, and just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thanks as well.